Saint Augustine, The Harmony of the Gospels, Book 2, Chapter 9. An explanation of the circumstance that Matthew states that Joseph's reason for going into Galilee with the child Christ was his fear of Archelaus, who was reigning at that time in Jerusalem in place of his father, while Luke tells us that the reason for going into Galilee was the fact that their city Nazareth was there. Or may a question perchance be raised as to how Matthew tells us that his parents went with the boy Jesus into Galilee, because they were unwilling to go into Judea in consequence of their fear of Archelaus, whereas it would rather appear that the reason for their going into Galilee was, as Luke has not failed to indicate, the consideration that their city was Nazareth of Galilee. Well, but we must observe that when the angel said to Joseph in his dreams in Egypt, "Arise and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Israel," the words were understood at first by Joseph in a way that made him consider himself commanded to journey into Judea. For that was the first interpretation that could have been put unto the phrase, the land of Israel. But again, after ascertaining that Archelaus, the son of Herod, was reigning there, he declined to expose himself to such danger, inasmuch as this phrase, the land of Israel, was capable also of being so understood as to cover Galilee too, because the people of Israel were occupants of that territory as well as the other. At the same time, this question also admits of being solved in another manner. For it might have appeared to the parents of Christ that they were called to take up their residence along with the boy, concerning whom such information had been conveyed to them through the responses of angels, just in Jerusalem itself, where was the temple of the Lord. And it may thus be that when they came back out of Egypt, they would have gone directly there in that belief and have taken up their abode there, had it not been that they were terrified at the presence of Archelaus. And certainly they did not receive any such instructions from heaven to take up their residence there, as would have made it their imperative duty to set at naught the fears that they entertained of Archelaus. Chapter 10. A statement of the reason why Luke tells us that his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover, along with the boy, while Matthew intimates that their dread of Archelaus made them afraid to go there on their return from Egypt. Or does anyone put to us this question? How was it then that his parents went up to Jerusalem every year during the boyhood of Christ, as Luke's narrative bears, if they were prevented from going there by the fear of Archelaus? Well, I should not deem it any very difficult task to solve this question, even although none of the evangelists has given us to understand how long Archelaus reigned there. For it might have been the case that simply for that one day, and with the intention of returning immediately, they went up on the day of the feast, without attracting any notice among the vast multitudes then assembled to the city, where, nevertheless, they were afraid to make their residence on other days. and thus they might at once have saved themselves from the appearance of being so irreligious as to neglect the observance of the feast and have avoided drawing attention upon themselves by a continued sojourn. But further, although all the evangelists have omitted to tell us what was the length of the reign of Archelaus, we have still open to us this obvious method of explaining the matter, namely, to understand. The custom to which Luke refers when he says that they were in the habit of going to Jerusalem every year, as one persecuted at a time when Archelaus was no more an object of fear. But if the reign of Archelaus should be made out to have lasted for a somewhat longer period on the authority of any extra-evangelical history which appears to deserve credit, the consideration which I have indicated above should still prove quite sufficient, namely, the supposition that the fear which the parents of the child entertained of a residence in Jerusalem was, nevertheless, not of such a nature as to lead them to neglect the observance of the sacred festival to which they were under obligation in the fear of God, and which they might very easily go about in a manner that would not attract public attention to them. For surely it is nothing incredible that, by taking advantage of favorable opportunities, whether by day or by hour, men may safely venture to approach places in which they nevertheless are afraid to be found tarrying.